The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and distant smoke as Judson Pryor finished mending the fence that had been troubling him for weeks. His small ranch sat in a valley carved from the Colorado Territory wilderness, where a man could work his land in peace and answer to no one but the Almighty and his own conscience. At 32, Judson had built a modest life from nothing more than determination and back-breaking labor. His cabin was small but solid, his few head of cattle healthy, and his solitude complete. The sound of approaching footsteps on his porch made him look up from his evening coffee. Through the window, he glimpsed a shadow that seemed too tall, too imposing to belong to any woman he'd ever known. When he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her dark hair braided with a faded blue ribbon that stirred something deep in his memory. Her pale eyes held secrets he couldn't name, and when she spoke, a voice carried the weight of mountain stone. "I'm carrying your baby," she said without preamble, watching his face with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey. Judson's coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the wooden floor. The woman stepped across the threshold without invitation, moving through his home with a familiarity that made his skin crawl. She avoided the loose board by the window, ducked beneath a low beam that had caught him countless times, and her eyes found his grandmother's quilt folded neatly on his narrow bed. "You kept the quilt with the yellow roses," she observed softly. "You wrapped me in it that night." Said it smelled like home and honey cakes. The words triggered fragments of sensation, desperate warmth shared against bitter cold, the weight of someone trembling in his arms. But her face remained hidden in the shadows of his fractured memory. "Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong man," he managed, though his voice cracked like dry timber. "I've never—" "The night of the storm," she interrupted, her pale eyes never leaving his. "You told me your mother's name was Ruth. You have a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on your shoulder. You talk in your sleep about a horse named Thunder." Each detail hit him like a physical blow. Thunder, his beloved gelding, lost in that terrible storm 3 months ago. The grief of that loss had carved a hole in his heart he'd never been able to explain. No stranger should know these things. No one alive knew about Thunder's final moments, the way Judson had held his faithful companion as life faded from his eyes. "That's impossible," he whispered, stumbling backward until his shoulders hit the wall. The woman's hand moved to rest on her still flat belly. 3 months along. Due come spring. She tilted her head, studying him with those unsettling pale eyes. "You really don't remember, do you?" Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of his fence. The same fence he'd been meaning to fix since ... When? The memory felt important, but it slipped away like water through his fingers. The familiar space of his cabin suddenly felt foreign, contaminated by her presence and the impossible knowledge she carried. "I need to sit down," he said, his legs unsteady beneath him. The woman Lara, her name whispered itself through his mind, though he couldn't remember learning it, followed without invitation. Her boots made no sound on the creaking floorboards, and she moved with the grace of someone who'd learned to navigate a world built for smaller people. "You were shaking that night," she said quietly, settling into his chair like she belonged. "There, cold down to your bones. I stayed with you, made sure you didn't slip away while you slept." The image flashed through his mind with startling clarity, standing at his window in the pre-dawn darkness, coffee growing cold in his hands, watching light spill across the valley. The inexplicable sense of loss that had followed him for weeks. Afterward, the feeling that something precious had walked out of his life while he wasn't paying attention. "Why can't I remember your face?" he asked desperately. "I remember feeling empty, like something was missing, but I can't see you there." Lara's expression softened, revealing something vulnerable beneath her composed exterior. "You hit your head that night. Fell trying to get the horses into the corral during the worst of it. Came back to the cabin bleeding, barely standing upright. The memory slammed into him without warning, pain exploding across his skull. The metallic taste of blood in his mouth, stumbling through driving rain with thunder's panicked whinnying echoing in his ears. His hand rose unconsciously to the back of his head, finding the tender scar he'd never been able to explain. "I remember falling," he breathed, "but I thought I was alone." "You weren't alone." Lara's voice carried a weight of grief it made. His chest ached. "And when you woke up the next morning, you looked right through me like I was a stranger. Like the night before had never happened." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications Judson wasn't ready to face. A child his. Child growing inside a woman whose touch he couldn't remember but whose absence had haunted him for months. The thought should have terrified him, but instead he felt only a deep, inexplicable longing. "Show me," he said quietly. Lara rose from the chair, her movements deliberate and careful. "It started with thunder," she said, moving toward the window. "You heard him screaming in the corral, fighting against something in the darkness." The name hit Judson like a physical blow. His throat tightened with grief that felt as fresh as it had 3 months ago, though he'd never understood why one animal's death could carve such a hole in his heart. "You remember him?" Lara observed, watching his reaction with those pale, knowing eyes. "He broke his leg in the storm. I had to put him down the next morning." Judson's voice cracked with remembered anguish. "But I don't remember how it happened. Just that I found him twisted up in the fence, leg snapped clean through." "He was trying to protect me," Lara said softly. "When you found me on the road, I was running from something." Thunder sensed the danger before either of us did. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Judson studied Lara's face, noting the way her jaw tightened when she spoke, the unconscious way her hand moved to her ribs as if protecting old wounds. She was a woman accustomed to violence, he realized. Someone who'd learned to read threat in every shadow. "Running." "From what?" he asked, though part of him already feared the answer. Lara's reflection in the glass looked haunted. "My husband." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything Judson thought he understood. A married woman. He'd taken a married woman into his bed, created a child with someone who belonged to another man. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a yoke. "You were married," he said, the taste of the words bitter in his mouth. "I was." Lara turned back to face him, and he saw steel in her pale eyes. "To a man who used his fists more than his words. Who thought my height gave him the right to try and cut me down to size." The casual way she spoke of abuse made Judson's stomach clench. He'd grown up with a father who believed in the sanctity of marriage, but also in the duty of strong men to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The thought of any man raising his hand to a woman, especially this woman, filled him with a cold fury. He didn't fully understand. Where is he now? The question came out harder than he'd intended. "That's what I've been trying to figure out." Lara moved closer, her presence filling the small space. "He followed me that night, Judson. I heard his voice in the storm, calling for me, promising what he'd do when he found me." Memory flickered at the edges of Judson's consciousness. A man's voice, harsh and threatening, cutting through the wind and rain. The protective fury that had risen in his chest, the absolute certainty that he would die before letting anyone hurt the woman under his roof. "I remember anger," he said slowly. "Pure, clean anger like I'd never felt before." "You stood between us," Lara whispered. "Even bleeding from your head injury, barely able to stand upright. You put yourself between me and the door. Said you'd kill him before you'd let him take me." The memory crashed over him in a wave of sensation and emotion. The weight of the rifle in his hands, though he couldn't recall loading it. The way Lyra had pressed herself against his back, her fear palpable in the darkness. The sound of footsteps, circling the cabin, testing doors and windows like a predator seeking weakness. He was here, Judson breathed, the pieces falling into place. Outside the cabin, all night, Lyra confirmed. Waiting, watching, calling my name through the storm like some kind of demon. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And when morning came, I knew I had to leave. The color drained from Judson's face as understanding dawned. You left to protect me. I left to protect us both, Lyra corrected, though her eyes wouldn't meet his. Marcus wouldn't stop hunting me. Every day I stayed put you in more danger. Marcus, the name tasted like poison on his tongue. Even hearing it spoken aloud made his hands curl into fists. Your husband's name was Marcus, he said. Lyra corrected quietly. His name is Marcus. The present tense hit Judson like a sledgehammer to the chest. His legs gave out and he sank into the remaining chair, the wood groaning under his sudden weight. Marcus was alive. The man who terrorized Lyra, who'd broken into his home and threatened their lives, was somewhere out there in the wilderness. He's still alive, Judson said, more to himself than to her. Lyra moved to his small kitchen area, her nervous energy needing an outlet. She began organizing his sparse supplies with practiced efficiency, another sign of familiarity that shouldn't exist. Her movements were economical, purposeful, like someone who'd learned not to waste motion or time. I thought I'd killed him that night, she said, her voice flat and matter-of-fact, though Judson heard the tremor underneath. Hit him with the fireplace poker while he was focused on getting to you. He went down hard, didn't get back up. There was so much blood. She trailed off, her hand stilling on a tin of coffee. Judson rose slowly, his body moving without conscious thought until he stood behind her. Close enough to smell the lavender soap in her dark hair, close enough to feel the tension radiating from her tall frame. What happened when he broke in? Judson asked gently. You were unconscious from the head wound. The bleeding had gotten worse, and you kept drifting in and out. Lyra's voice became clinical, distant. I was trying to keep you awake, keep you talking, when I heard the glass break at the back window. The memory hit him in fragments, pain throbbing behind his eyes. A woman's voice calling his name through a haze of confusion, the taste of copper in his mouth. And underneath it all, a rage so pure it had burned away everything else. I remember getting up, he said slowly, even though the room was spinning. I remember reaching for something. The fireplace poker, Lyra confirmed. You could barely stand, but you wouldn't let me face him alone. But you did face him alone, didn't you? Judson's voice was soft, understanding flooding through him. Because I passed out again. Lyra nodded, her shoulders rigid with old tension. He came at me with a knife. Said he'd rather see me dead than with another man. Promised he'd carve the baby right out of me once he was finished with you. The casual cruelty of it made Judson's stomach turn. You didn't know you were carrying them? No, but he did. Lyra turned to face him, and Judson saw something broken in her pale eyes. He'd been tracking my monthly cycles, watching for signs. Said he wanted to be sure I could never give another man what belonged to him. The possessive language, the calculated control, they painted a picture of abuse that went far deeper than physical violence. Marcus wasn't just violent. He was methodical in his cruelty. How did you stop him? Judson asked, though he dreaded the answer. The same poker you tried to reach. He was so focused on getting to you, lying there helpless, that he didn't see. Me pick it up. Lyra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I hit him once, as hard as I could. He went down and didn't get back up. You thought he was dead. There was so much blood, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. I waited until dawn, but he never moved, never breathed that I could see. So I buried him in the old well behind your property and left before you woke up." Judson felt the world shift around him, reality rearranging itself into new and terrible patterns. "The well I've been meaning to clear out for months. The same one." Lara met his eyes directly. "Except when I went back there yesterday to make sure his body was still hidden, I found something that changed everything." The cabin fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the trees. Judson's mouth went dry as dust. "What did you find?" "The well was empty, Judson, and there were fresh tracks leading away from it." The silence that followed was deafening. Judson felt his carefully ordered world crumble into dust. Every assumption he'd held about the past 3 months proven false. Marcus was alive, had been. Alive all this time, healing from his wounds and planning his revenge. How long ago were those tracks? Judson asked, already moving toward his rifle. "Fresh, maybe hours old." Lara watched him check his ammunition with movements that seemed to surprise her. "You remember how to use that?" "Some things you don't forget, even with a busted head." He loaded the rifle with steady hands, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. "We need to leave, now." "Where would we go? He'll track us wherever we run." "Then we don't run." Judson met her eyes, and she saw something hard and dangerous there. "We end this." Lara shook her head, fear creeping into her voice for the first time since she'd arrived. "You don't understand what he's capable of. Marcus isn't just violent. He's clever, patient. He's been planning this for months, probably watching us both." The thought made Judson's skin crawl. How long had Marcus been out there, healing from his injuries while studying the routines? How many nights had he stood in the darkness beyond the cabin windows, waiting for the right moment to strike? "Let him come," Judson said, surprising himself with the venom in his voice. "I should have finished what we started that night. You were half dead from blood loss. You did more than anyone could have expected." Lara moved closer, her hand brushing against his arm. The contact sent electricity through his entire body, awakening sensations that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. "I remember more now," he said quietly. "The way you felt in my arms, the promises we made to each other in the dark." Lara's breath caught. "Judson, I promised to protect you, to keep you safe no matter what it cost me." His free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I may not remember everything, but I remember that." She leaned into his touch, her pale eyes closing briefly. Those promises were made by a man who didn't know what he was getting into. They were made by a man who'd found something worth fighting for. Judson's voice was rough with emotion. Something worth dying for, if it came to that. The sound of a horse's hooves on hard ground cut through the afternoon air, distant but unmistakable. Both of them froze, their eyes locking in shared terror. "He's here," Lara whispered. Judson pulled her against him, feeling her heart hammering against his chest. She was so tall that her forehead nearly reached his chin, but in that moment she felt fragile, breakable. The woman who'd faced down her abusive husband with nothing but a fireplace poker was trembling in his arms. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "There's a root cellar behind the cabin, hidden under an old tarp and some boards. You go there, and you stay there until this is over. I won't hide while you face him alone. You're carrying my child." The words came out fierce, possessive. "Our child. That changes everything." The hoofbeats were getting closer, accompanied now by the sound of a man's voice calling through the trees. "Lara, I know you're in there, wife. Come out now, and I might let your lover live long enough to watch." Marcus's voice carried across the clearing like poison on the wind, each word calculated to inflict maximum damage. Judson felt Lara flinch against him, her body going rigid with remembered fear. 3 months I've been healing, wife. 3 months. Thinking about what I'm going to do to you both. The voice was circling the cabin now like a predator testing for weakness. Through the broken window, Judson caught glimpses of a man on horseback, moving with the patience of someone who knew his prey had nowhere to run. "I've got something that belongs to you, Judson," Marcus called, his tone shifting to mock friendliness. "Something I found buried in that old well. Want to see what your thunder looked like after 3 months underground?" The taunt hit its mark. Judson's vision went red around the edges, rage flooding his system like wildfire. His horse, his faithful companion, desecrated and used as a weapon against him. The memories came rushing back in a torrent thunder's final moments, eyes wide with pain and trust. The gentle way Lara had held the horse's head while Judson ended his suffering. "You remember," Lara breathed, seeing the recognition in his eyes. "I remember everything." Judson's voice was deadly calm now, the fury compressed into something cold and focused. "I remember how he screamed when you hit him. I remember the sound his skull made when it cracked. He's trying to make you angry, make you reckless." "No." Judson moved to the window, keeping himself hidden behind the frame as he studied the tree line. "He's trying to draw me outside where he can see me coming. But I'm not the same man he fought 3 months ago." Marcus's laughter drifted through the walls, harsh and grating. "Come now, Judson, let's finish what we started. Just you and me, man to man. Leave my wife out of it." "I'm not your wife," Lara called out, her voice stronger than Judson expected. "I haven't been your wife since the first time you raised your hand to me." The response was immediate and vicious. "You'll always be mine, you freak." No decent man wants a woman who towers over him like some circus act. But this fool here, he doesn't know what you really are, does he? Judson felt Lara tense beside him, old wounds reopening under Marcus's practiced cruelty. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "He's wrong," Judson said, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "She's perfect, exactly as she is." The silence that followed was somehow more threatening than the taunts had been. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed, gone cold and deadly. "Have it your way, then. But I'm not leaving here without her, and I'm not leaving either of you breathing." The first shot shattered what remained of the front window, sending glass flying across the cabin floor. Judson pulled Lara down behind the overturned table as a second bullet splintered the wooden frame where his head had been moments before. The sound of hoofbeats circled the cabin, Marcus using his horse as a mobile firing platform, making himself a harder target while keeping them pinned inside. "He's trying to flush us out," Judson said, checking his ammunition. "Force us to run where he can pick us off in the open." Another shot punched through the thin wooden walls, close enough that Judson felt the air move past his ear. Marcus was getting bolder, his aim more precise with each attempt. The acrid smell of smoke began to filter through the walls. Marcus had set something ablaze outside, probably the woodpile Judson had stacked against the cabin's east wall for winter. "Fire," Judson muttered, his mind racing through options that grew more desperate by the second. "He's gonna smoke us out like rabbits from a warren." The heat was building quickly, the dry wood of the cabin walls catching faster than Judson would have believed possible. Within minutes, they'd be forced to choose between burning alive or facing Marcus's rifle in the open. "There's another way," Lara said suddenly. "The root cellar. It connects to an old mine shaft that runs under the property. We could come up behind him." Judson stared at her. "You never mentioned a mine shaft. You were unconscious most of that night." I explored while keeping watch. Smoke was thickening around them now, making their eyes water and their breathing labored. "The tunnel comes up near the creek, about 50 yards behind where he's positioned." A burning piece of roof timber crashed down near the back wall, sending sparks cascading across the floor. The cabin was becoming an oven. "Can you make it through the tunnel in your condition?" Lara's laugh was grim. I made it through 3 months of hell carrying this baby. I can make it through a tunnel. They made their way to the hidden entrance as smoke filled the cabin, stinging their eyes and lungs. As Judson pulled up the concealed trapdoor, Marcus's voice carried through the crackling flames. I can wait all day, wife. Fire's getting hot in there, isn't it? Come out now, and I'll make it quick. Judson helped Lara down into the darkness below, then followed, pulling the trapdoor shut above them. The tunnel was cramped and airless, carved from the living rock by miners who'd abandoned their claims decades ago. They crawled through the blackness, guided only by the faint current of air that promised an exit somewhere ahead. Behind them, muffled shouts suggested Marcus had discovered their escape route. His boots thundered overhead as he searched the burning cabin, growing more frantic by the minute. He's in the cabin, Judson whispered, his voice barely audible above their labored breathing. Then we have maybe 5 minutes before he figures out where this leads, Lara replied. The tunnel seemed endless, narrow and choked with 3 months of settled dust. Lara's breathing grew labored, and more than once Judson had to stop and wait for her to catch up. She was pushing herself hard, risking everything for a chance to turn the tables on her tormentor. They emerged from the tunnel mouth behind a screen of overgrown brush, gasping in the clean air. Judson could see his cabin in the distance. Flames, now licking at the roof and black smoke rising into the afternoon sky. Marcus's horse stood near the front door, saddled and ready for pursuit, but Marcus himself was nowhere to be seen. He's inside looking for us, Lara breathed. Judson checked his rifle, then looked at the woman beside him. Dirt streaked her face, and her dark hair had come loose from its braid, but her pale eyes were steady and determined. She'd crawled through that tunnel while carrying his child, risking everything for a chance at freedom. When I give the signal, you head for the creek, he said. Get as far away as you can. No. Lara's voice was firm. We finish this together. Before Judson could argue, Marcus appeared in the cabin doorway, his face twisted with rage as he realized his prey had escaped. He had his rifle in his hands and murder in his eyes. There, he shouted, spotting them through the brush. Thought you were clever, did you? Marcus raised his rifle, but Judson was already moving, pulling Lara behind the cover of a fallen log as the shot went wide. The range was too great for accurate shooting, but Marcus was advancing fast, using the scattered trees for cover. I need you to trust me, Judson said urgently. When I stand up, you run for the creek. Don't look back. Judson, I remember everything now, he interrupted, pressing a quick, fierce kiss to her lips. Including how much I love you. Our child deserves better than to grow up in fear. Judson rose from behind the log, rifle ready, drawing Marcus's attention and fire. The shot went wide, and in that moment of distraction, Judson saw his opening. Marcus was reloading, his attention focused on working the bolt of his rifle. The distance was 60 yards, a difficult shot, but not impossible for a man who'd hunted these mountains since he was old enough to hold a rifle. Judson took a deep breath, let it out halfway, and squeezed the trigger. Marcus staggered but didn't fall. The shot had taken him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not putting him down. He dropped behind a boulder, wounded but far from finished. You always were a decent shot, Marcus called out, his voice strained with pain but still mocking. But you're going to have to do better than that. I've got all day, Judson replied, moving to better cover as Marcus returned fire. For the next 20 minutes, they played a deadly game of cat and mouse among the trees and rocks. Marcus was wounded but still dangerous, using his knowledge of the terrain to stay one step ahead. Judson was the better marksman, but he was fighting defensively, trying to protect Lara while taking down a man who had nothing left to lose. The turning point came when Marcus made a fatal error in judgment, perhaps weakened by blood loss or Driven by desperation, he broke cover and made a run for his horse. The movement exposed him for just a moment, but it was enough. Judson's second shot was true. Marcus crumpled to the ground 50 feet from his horse, his rifle spinning away into the grass. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the crackle of flames consuming what remained of Judson's home. After a long moment, Lara emerged from the creek brush, her eyes fixed on Marcus's motionless form. Is he dead? Judson kept his rifle, trained on the fallen man until he was certain there was no movement, no breath. Only then did he lower the weapon and allow himself to breathe. He's dead, he confirmed. They stood together in the clearing, watching smoke rise from the ruins of Judson's cabin. Everything he'd built over the past decade was gone, reduced to ash and memory. But somehow, looking at Lara standing strong beside him, he felt no sense of loss, only the promise of something better to come. What do we do now? Lara asked quietly. Judson reached for her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. Now we build something new, together. 6 months later, the sound of hammer on nail rang through the clear mountain air as Judson finished securing the last board on their new cabin. This one was built closer to town, on land purchased with the money from selling Marcus's horse and belongings to the territorial marshal. It was larger than his old home, with a proper bedroom and a nursery that would be ready just in time. Lara sat in the shade of the big oak tree, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. Rebecca Pryor had arrived 2 weeks early, with her mother's pale blue eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She was perfect in every way that mattered. She has your eyes, Lara said softly, adjusting the tiny yellow blanket that had been her first gift from the women of the town. Judson set down his hammer and wiped the sweat from his brow. The people of Cedar Falls had welcomed them with open arms once they'd heard the full story. A woman escaping an abusive marriage, a man protecting what was his. It was a tale that resonated with frontier sensibilities about justice and courage. And your strength, he replied, settling beside them on the grass. She's going to be extraordinary. Like her parents, Lara said, reaching for his hand with her free arm. The marshal had closed the case quickly once he'd seen Marcus's body and heard their testimony. Self-defense was clear enough, and Marcus's reputation had preceded him. There'd been warrants out for his arrest in 2 other territories. Sometimes, Judson reflected, justice wore many faces. Their wedding had been simple, performed by the circuit preacher in front of half the town. Lara had worn a dress borrowed from the banker's wife, altered to fit her tall frame, and carried wildflowers picked from the meadow where they'd first fought for their lives together. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, there hadn't been a dry eye in the church thought now, watching his wife cradle their daughter in the shadow of their new home. Judson felt a peace he'd never known was possible. The nightmares had faded, replaced by dreams of the future they would build together. What are you thinking about? Lara asked, noticing his distant expression. Just wondering what Thunder would think of all this, Judson admitted. He died. Protecting you, protecting us. I like to think he'd approve. Lara smiled, the expression transforming her strong features into something beautiful and serene. I think he would too. You both have that same protective spirit. Little Rebecca stirred in her mother's arms, making the soft sounds that meant she'd be hungry soon. As if reading his daughter's mind, Judson stood and stretched, his back aching pleasantly from the day's honest work. I should get started on supper, he said. Let me, Lara began, but Judson shook his head. You've done enough today, taking care of our little one. Besides, he grinned, I make a mean venison stew. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Pryor family settled into their new life with quiet contentment. The past had been painful, but it had led them to this moment, this place, This perfect completeness. Sometimes the greatest battles were won not through violence, but through the simple act of refusing to give up on love. In a land where survival depended on strength and determination, they had found something rarer than gold or glory. They had found each other. And in the years to come, when little Rebecca asked about how her parents met, they would tell her the truth, that love sometimes came in the form of a stranger at the door, carrying impossible knowledge and an unshakable faith in the possibility of redemption. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to stand and fight when everything that mattered hung in the balance. It was a story worth passing down, a reminder that even in the darkest storms, hope could take root and grow into something beautiful and enduring, something worth fighting for, no matter the cost.